Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton move closer to their party's nominations, both surging in victory in New York. Live from CNN's World Headquarters in Atlanta, I'm Lynda Kinkade. CNN Newsroom starts right now.
Thank you, New York!
I can think of nowhere that I would rather have this victory.
There's no place like home.
Senator Cruz is just about mathematically eliminated.
To all the people who supported Senator Sanders, I believe there is much more that unites us than divides us.
Hello, everyone. We begin with a major victory and a warm homecoming for US presidential candidates Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Tuesday's New York primary handed monumental wins to the two frontrunners. After a string of losses to her rival Bernie Sanders, Clinton is now on the brink of clinching the Democratic nomination. Clinton took nearly 58% of the vote in New York, a firm win over Sanders. And Trump clobbered his two opponents with more than 60% of the vote. He swept nearly all of the state's delegates. Now, I want to get right to my next guests. Jonathan Swan is a political reporter with The Hill, and David Swerdlick is an assistant editor with The Washington Post. They both join me live from D.C. Thanks very much for being with us. Firstly to Jonathan, Trump won so decisively in New York. Mathematically, it's now impossible for Cruz or Kasich to actually get the number of delegates needed. Just take a look at this graphic. Cruz needs about 101%, which is impossible. Kasich needs 162%. So what's the likelihood Trump will get the delegates needed to secure the nomination going forward?
The most likely scenario, if you look at most projections, is that Donald Trump will fall just slightly short of the 1,237 pledged delegates needed to win the nomination. But the question is, how close to 1,237 will he get? It's possible, of course, that he could get it. He needs to win more than 60% of the remaining delegates to get 1,237. But I think what's going to happen is he's probably going to get somewhere between 1,100, maybe 1,150, maybe 1,200 delegates. And then the big question remains, can Donald Trump convince enough of the unbound delegates, there's going to be roughly 200 of them, to come over to his campaign? And of course, the counter to that question is, can the party regulars, who are these delegates, live with themselves to say, well, he came ever so close, he clearly has the most votes, but we are going to, risk saying that we're subverting the will of the people and supporting someone that we prefer.
Yeah, that is a good point. David, just to you, looking at Trump's victory speech last night, it seems we saw a bit of a change in tone. There was no reference to lying Ted. Instead, he referred to him as Senator Cruz. Just take a listen to what he said.
We've won another state. As you know, we have won millions of more votes than Senator Cruz, millions and millions of more votes than Governor Kasich.
Do you think this could be thanks to his new team behind the Trump campaign? Are we seeing a new presidential Trump?
Yeah, it probably is thanks to his new team. He's brought on Paul Manafort, he's brought on Wiley. What he's trying to do is pivot to presenting himself as the indisputable and inevitable Republican nominee going into the convention and then going into the general election. I think Jonathan is about right on the math. Trump looks to be maybe that he'll fall just shy of getting the 1,237 delegates, but if he can rack up wins in these upcoming northeastern states, New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, it will give the appearance that he is inevitable, and that's what his campaign wants. And so they'd like to change the message of combative Trump to a Trump who's going to try to come into the convention in Cleveland, unifying the party. That's what the Senator Cruz language instead of lying Ted is probably all about.
And Senator Cruz has again been speaking about that delegate count, saying he believes no one can get it. To you, Jonathan, despite saying that, Cruz says, and despite the fact that Trump won New York convincingly, Cruz said that he couldn't run a lemonade stand, nor could his team, and he continues to argue that he can win in a convention. Just take a listen to what he said.
The math is virtually impossible for Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not getting to 1237. Nobody's getting to 1237. The reason Donald's so scared is the last 3 weeks, and in particular the win in Wisconsin, put the nail in the coffin and made clear Donald doesn't get to 1237. He knows that.
So do you think there would be a revolt amongst Trump supporters if Cruz is well behind in the delegate count, yet Trump hasn't quite got that magic number of 1237, and it gets to a convention and Cruz wins the nomination?
Well, we've seen violent scenes historically at Trump rallies, and Donald Trump has also shown a willingness to suggest that there might be violence. Now, he's obviously walking a very narrow path there, because he hasn't said, you know, I direct you to go out and inflict violence. But, you know, the difference between this convention and the last time there was a contested convention in 1976 is we have Twitter, and all it would take, I suspect, would be one tweet from Donald Trump to his, you know, thousands, hundreds of thousands of passionate supporters saying, you know, we was robbed. And, you know, you could imagine there being very tense scenes there.
And it certainly wouldn't look good for the Republican Party and the future of that party. David, just to you, looking at the turnout in New York, far more Democrats came out to vote, 1.8 million compared to 850,000 Republican voters or thereabouts. Yet just looking at the Republicans, Trump seemed to do very well across every demographic. Does that bode well for him in a general election?
Well, I think in a general election, New York is very likely to still go blue or go Democrat. It is a solidly Democratic state. New York City is the biggest city in the country, and it is a solidly a very liberal city, and that's where most of the votes in New York are. That being said, Trump's brand of republicanism does wear better in the Northeast, in his home state of New York, than it does in some of the Midwestern and Southern states, just as Senator Cruz's brand of conservatism, his social conservatism, his movement conservatism, has worn better. He won his home state of Texas, of course. It wore well in the Midwest and the South, but in New York, and very likely in these upcoming northeastern states, Cruz is going to struggle. We see that even though he's second in the race, he came in third last night, because his brand of conservatism is not the kind of republicanism that you find in the Northeast. Donald Trump is known to New Yorkers, and even if they don't agree with him on policy, and even if they're a little put off by some of his campaign strategies and his campaign message, New Yorkers are very familiar with Trump over the last, really, 30 years.
That is true. Jonathan, looking at Hillary Clinton and her winning speech last night, she sounded like she's already trying to win over Sanders supporters. Just take a listen to what she said.
And to all the people who supported Senator Sanders, I believe there is much more that unites us than divides us.
So, Jonathan, what needs to happen for Hillary Clinton to win over Sanders' loyal supporters?
Well, she needs the really interesting thing in the Democratic race is not the result at the moment, which is in no doubt. I mean, you talk about Bernie Sanders. Yes, he's going to have enough money to stay in, but he's not going to win the delegates. But he is still crushing Hillary Clinton among young voters. There was a very interesting exit poll last night saying that among 18 to 29-year-olds, Sanders had more than 70% of the vote. Now, the Clinton strategy to win over 18 to 29-year-olds, as it's been explained to me, is for Sanders to be a surrogate. And they're hoping, of course, that when all of this is done, Bernie Sanders will hit the campaign trail, you know, vote for Hillary in a similar way that Hillary Clinton made that conciliatory gesture in 2008 towards Barack Obama.
Okay, and just finally to David, despite the fact that Bernie Sanders lost last night, he is still convinced he can win. He is certainly in a better position than the Republicans trailing Trump, but going forward, he's got a pretty big challenge.
Yeah, Lynda, he has a big challenge. He has money. He's been very successful at raising money across the country from small donors. He's got a message that resonates, as Jonathan said, with younger voters in particular. And there's really no reason for him to get out of the race or to concede anything to Secretary Clinton at this point. On the other hand, she leads among a broader coalition of Democratic voters. She's doing well in states that are more reflective of the broader Obama coalition that he put together in 2008 and 2012 with African-American voters, with Latinos, with women over 40, with a variety of constituent groups that really make up the Democratic Party. In states where there have been caucuses as opposed to primaries, states that favor the more enthusiastic voters, Sanders has done well. In states that are less diverse, Sanders has done well. New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, the states that are coming up are not those states. These are states that favor Secretary Clinton, and she's leading in the polls in all those states right now and is expected to do well in those states. That being said, I think it probably benefits Sanders to carry his message on through to the convention. And in a way, I think even though the Clinton campaign is starting to pivot toward this idea that she's the inevitable nominee and that Sanders should kind of start to ratchet the rhetoric down, she has actually benefited by having him as a competitor in this race and not having had to face a one-on-one war of words with Donald Trump at this point in the race.
Okay, David Swerdlick and Jonathan Swan, thanks both of you for joining us today.